A farmer stands at a chain-link fence every October, and no one at the depot has ever learned his name. "Somebody tell that old man the fence isn't a wishing well," said the sailor on the left, a kid barely 20 with a clipboard he wasn't using, and a haircut still fresh enough to show the razor lines. His partner laughed, low, the kind of laugh meant to be heard by whoever else was standing post at the Millbrook gate that Wednesday morning. Neither of them had been born the year the file opened. Neither of them knew that the man they were laughing at had been standing at some version of that fence, in some version of that coat, every October for 15 years running, and that this was the last October it would matter. 15 years the file had been open. 15 years a name had sat in a drawer marked presumed lost, unrecovered, contractor status unconfirmed. 3 days from now, on Saturday, the Navy would close it for good. A ceremony, a program printed on heavy stock, a bronze plaque with a name already cast into it, cooling in a foundry 2 counties over, waiting only to be bolted to a wall. Whatever truth still had a chance to surface had until Saturday morning to do it, and after that it would be poured into metal and would not move again. The old man at the fence did not turn when they laughed. He wore a canvas barn coat gone the color of wet sand, and beneath it a flannel shirt soft at the elbows from 1,000 washes, and boots resoled so many times over that the stitching along the toe no longer matched the stitching along the heel. He stood the way a fence post stands, weight settled, hands loose at his sides, watching the depot yard through the diamond gaps in the wire the way another man might watch a river for a fish he already knew was there. "Radio it in," the first sailor said, already reaching for the handset clipped to his shoulder, the request halfway out of his mouth before either of them had asked the old man a single question. "We got a civilian loitering at the north fence, ceremony day -3, requesting escort." The reply crackled back before the old man had shifted his weight even once. Base security would send someone. It was standard. A shabby stranger at a fence during a high-visibility ceremony week was not a mystery to these two. It was a checkbox, a line item, a thing to be handled and logged and forgotten by lunch. They had no way of knowing that the man leaning against their fence had spent 36 years going down into black water for the United States Navy. That he had a contractor number stamped into a tag worn smooth in his coat pocket at that very moment. Or that somewhere inside the depot's records office, in a box marked for shredding within 48 hours under a retention policy nobody had thought to double-check against a ceremony date, sat the only surviving proof of who he actually was. He didn't leave. He didn't argue. He turned his head, finally, toward the 2 young sailors and said nothing at all. Just looked at them the unhurried way a man looks at weather he's already dressed for, and went back to watching the yard. If you've ever carried a truth nobody asked you to tell, type steady in the comments, because that was the mystery underneath all of it. The one no uniform and no plaque and no ceremony program would answer on its own. Why a man who had spent 15 years telling no one, not the Navy, not his neighbors, not even his own late wife's family, the truth about that classified dive, would still drive 40 minutes every October just to stand outside a fence he could walk through with the right piece of paper, and never once asked to be let in. That morning, before any of it, the light over the Prentice farm came up thin and silver through a mist that hadn't decided yet whether to burn off or settle into rain. Newell Prentice was already awake for it, the way he was awake for every morning that had come since Opal passed 9 years back. Early, unhurried, moving through the kitchen with the particular economy of a man who has done a task so many thousand times that his body performs it without consulting him. He filled the kettle. He set it on the burner. He did not look at the windowsill above the sink as he did it. And he did not need to, because he had looked at it every morning for 9 years and knew exactly what waited there. Opal's reading glasses, tortoiseshell frames gone slightly loose at one hinge, resting where she'd left them the last evening of her life, folded closed on top of a seed catalog she never finished marking up. He had never moved them. He had dusted around them, careful as a man handling a live coal for 3,000 mornings running. While the water heated, he hummed, low in his chest, barely more than breath given shape, a hymn with no name he ever spoke aloud. One Opal used to hum while she worked her bee boxes in the side yard, smoke curling soft from the little tin smoker, her voice carrying over the hum of the hives themselves like she was singing the bees a small kindness they didn't know they needed. He still kept 2 boxes going, more out of loyalty than honey now. He'd hum the same 4 bars to them some mornings, out past the porch, hand resting flat on the warm wood, the way another man might rest a hand on a headstone. He ate standing at the counter. Then he went to the barn, coat hanging on its peg by the door. Not the coat he wore for chores, a different one, kept apart, the collar worn shiny at exactly the place a chain would sit if a man wore a chain. And from the breast pocket he drew out a length of ordinary bootlace, and threaded onto it, worn thin and tarnished, the deep brown green of old brass left too long in salt air, a tag no bigger than a silver dollar. Salvage diver, NAVC, stamped into the metal along with a contractor number he had never once needed to check because it lived in him the way his own birth date lived in him. He did not put it around his neck. He folded it, lace and all, back into the pocket, the way he had folded it back into that pocket every October for 15 years, and pressed his palm flat against the outside of the coat once, over the place where it sat, the same motion, economical, unhurried, absolute, that another man might use to check a lifeline before going down into the dark. He did not tell the coat why. He did not tell the kettle, or the glasses on the sill, or the empty second chair at the table. He had never told any of it to a living soul, not his neighbors, not the men at the feed store who knew him only as the quiet fellow with the good bees, not even Opal, though there had been nights early in their marriage when he'd come close, when she'd rested a hand on his chest in the dark and said only, without asking anything further, that a debt doesn't stop being owed just because nobody's asking for it. She had never known what debt. She had simply known there was one, carried in him the way a scar is carried, and she had let him carry it in peace, and that had been, he thought most mornings, the single greatest mercy of his life. He rinsed his cup. He set it in the rack. He took his keys down from the hook beside the barn coat, the everyday one, worn to soft nothing at the elbows, and did not look back at the glasses on the sill as he went out, because he never needed to. They would be there when he returned, the way they always were, the way the whole shape of his life since Opal had learned to hold still around an absence instead of trying to fill it. The truck started on the second try, same as it always did in October cold. He pulled out onto the county road with the mist still lifting off the low fields, and he drove east, toward the coast, toward the depot, the way he had driven every year on this same week since a black morning 15 years gone that no calendar in his kitchen ever marked, though his hands, closing slow and sure around the wheel, remembered the date better than any calendar could. By the time Newell reached the depot gate, the mist had burned off into a hard, bright morning, the kind of October light that makes everything, chain link, gravel, flagpole rope, look freshly cut out of tin. Kendra Wycliffe was 40 yards inside the yard with a laminated timeline swinging from a lanyard against her blazer, checking it against her watch for what was, by Tessa Ogle's count, the 11th time that hour. She had earned the right to be exhausted. Kendra had built this ceremony from nothing. Folding chairs requisitioned from 3 different commands, a bronze plaque commissioned and cast and shipped, a program vetted by 4 levels of public affairs review, a guest list that included 2 admirals and a congressional staffer, all of it converging on Saturday at 1100 hours, 3 days out. She had not slept 9 full hours in as many nights. When the radio call came through about a civilian at the north fence, she did not even look up from her clipboard before she said, "Handle it." The words automatic, already spoken in her mind to a dozen smaller problems that week. A missing folding table, a caterer's delivery window, a sound technician who couldn't find the right cable. It was only when security walked him in, not arrested, just escorted, the young sailor from the gate a half step behind him, like a man hurting something he wasn't sure wouldn't bolt, that Kendra actually looked up and looked at Newell Prentice for the first time and made the fast, human, entirely reasonable mistake of deciding she already understood him. She saw a barn coat gone the color of wet sand. She saw boots resoled past matching. she saw an old man standing very still in a yard full of purposeful young people in pressed uniforms, and some tired, overworked part of her brain slotted him instantly into a category she'd handled twice before that year alone. The confused elderly visitor, the well-meaning hoaxer chasing a family rumor about a lost uncle, the man who shows up at every base heritage event convinced his father's ghost is owed a folding chair. "Sir, I appreciate you coming out," she said, and she did mean it. In the clipped, overextended way people mean things they don't have room to feel fully. "But this is a closed rehearsal for Saturday's ceremony. For the record, we're not able to accommodate walk-in inquiries about historical cases this week. If you'd like to submit something in writing, our office has a form." Newell didn't answer right away. He looked past her, at the yard, at the risers going up, at the flag detail practicing a fold near the flagpole, at a stainless podium being leveled by two sailors with a torpedo level, the way a man reads a room he already half remembers. "The manifest," he said finally. "Quiet, no heat in it at all. The dive log from the sonar recovery, 15 years back. Somebody still has the contractor pages?" Kendra's patience, worn thin by 9 sleepless nights, closed over like a door. "Sir, that record's sealed, and it's part of a case that's being formally closed Saturday. I really can't discuss specifics with—" She stopped short of finishing the sentence, but the shape of the missing word. "With a stranger, with a member of the public, with someone we don't know," sat in the air anyway. "Petty officer, can you walk him back to the gate?" It was Tessa Ogle, 26 years old and 2 years into a job that mostly meant photocopying and filing, who didn't move right away. She was standing close enough to have heard the number Newell said next. Not to Kendra, not to anyone really, just under his breath. The way a man checks a combination lock by feel. A string of digits with a particular cadence to it. An old Navy contractor format nobody under 40 would recognize on sight. Tessa had spent 4 months that spring cataloging exactly that kind of number, off exactly that kind of old manifest page. And something about the rhythm of it, the way he said it like a man reciting his own name, snagged in her the way a splinter snags before you even feel the sting. She didn't say anything. There wasn't yet anything to say. But she watched the sailor lead him back toward the gate, unresisting, unhurried, his hand resting once, briefly, flat against the outside of his coat pocket, and she found she couldn't quite go back to her clipboard for a full minute after he'd gone. They didn't send him all the way home. Grady Beale, coming across the yard with Cedar healing loose at his left knee, caught the tail end of it. The old man being walked toward the gate, Kendra already turning back to her risers and her sound cable. And something in him, some instinct built over 6 years of reading rooms for what wasn't being said, made him call out that the man could wait at the yard's edge if he liked, out of the way, no harm in it, while they finished the rehearsal. Newell nodded once and went to the split-rail fence at the yard's far corner, and stood there the way he'd stood at the outer fence that morning, weight settled, hands loose, watching. Grady ran Cedar through the obedience sequence they'd rehearsed a dozen times that week for Saturday's honor detail. Heel, sit, down, stay, the release word, the whole set piece timed to the flag fold. Cedar was 11 years old, a Belgian Malinois gone silver at the muzzle. 9 years a working Navy detection dog before he'd traded active search duty for ceremonial and transition work 2 years back. And he ran the sequence clean the first 3 times through. Textbook, the kind of precision that made the watching sailors murmur approval under their breath. The 4th time through, he hesitated at the sit. It was small. Grady almost missed it. A half-second lag between command and compliance. Cedar's head canting a few degrees toward the fence line where Newell stood. Ears coming up and forward, nostrils working in that particular way handlers learn to read the way other people read a face. Grady reset him. Ran it again. The same hitch, sharper now, Cedar's weight shifting subtly toward his haunches, a low sound starting somewhere under his ribs that wasn't quite a whine and wasn't quite a growl. Something in between that Grady had only ever heard from him twice before in 6 years, both times over live scent. The sailors on the yard's edge had started to notice too. One of them, a young petty officer named Reed, stepped back half a pace without seeming to know he'd done it, the way a person moves off a train track before they've consciously registered the vibration in the rail. Another, older, a chief near retirement, went very still and watched Newell instead of the dog, some old instinct of his own quietly assembling pieces he didn't have names for yet. Newell said almost nothing through any of it. He didn't call to the dog. He didn't move toward the fence rail's open side. He stood with his hands loose and watched Cedar's ears with the same unbroken, patient attention he had once given a dive line paying out over a gunnel, reading tension the way another man reads print, watching for the one flicker that meant something was about to change 40 feet below the surface. "Bell, what's he doing?" Kendra called from across the yard, not quite a question, more a demand for the disruption to resolve itself before it cost her another 20 minutes she didn't have. "Working through something," Grady said, which was true, though he didn't yet know what. He reset Cedar a fifth time, hand signal sharp, voice pitched exactly the way 6 years of handling had taught him to pitch it. Cedar held the sit for perhaps 4 seconds, trembling now, faintly, along the haunches, a tremor Grady had only ever seen in dogs working live ordnance, and then broke. Not aggressive, not fast, Cedar came up off the sit and crossed the yard at a controlled, deliberate trot, ignoring Grady's recall command entirely for the first time in 6 years of service. Past the risers, past the stainless podium, straight toward the split-rail fence where an old man in a barn coat the color of wet sand stood with his hands loose at his sides, watching him come. Cedar stopped a foot short of Newell's boots and sat. Not a casual sit, a trained one, spine straight, ears forward, muzzle raised at a precise angle, one paw lifted an inch off the ground and held there, rigid, the whole posture locked into a shape that every sailor in that yard who'd ever worked a kennel recognized on sight, because it was the same posture drilled into every detection dog the Navy fielded. The final alert. The signal that means I have found the thing I was trained to find, and I am not moving until you come look. Nobody spoke. Somewhere behind Kendra, a folding chair, half unstacked, was set down with exaggerated care, as if noise itself might break whatever had just happened. Grady crossed the yard at a near run, and it was not fear on his face when he reached them. It was something closer to a man watching a door open onto a room he'd been told for years did not exist. "Down," he said, low, testing, and Cedar did not move, did not so much as flick an ear, held the alert the way he had never once broken it in 6 years of working live charges, food-hidden training aids, or an unexploded shell buried 9 feet down in a training lane. "That's not a random alert," Grady said, mostly to himself, crouching now beside his own dog, hand hovering an inch from Cedar's shoulder, without touching him. "Because you did not touch a dog mid-alert. You confirmed it. That's a calibrated signature. That's a specific—" He stopped, looked up at Newell, and for the first time since the old man had come through the gate that morning, someone in that yard actually looked at him the way you look at a person instead of a problem. "He's trained to that scent," Grady said. "That exact profile. We only run him against 3 archive signatures depot-wide, and one of them's been on file since before I had this job." His voice had gone quieter with every word, the way a man's voice does when he's talking himself into believing something he already half knows. "One of them's off a 15-year-old recovery manifest, contractor sample, sonar array job." Kendra had crossed the yard by then, lanyard swinging, and for once her laminated timeline hung forgotten against her blazer. "Belle, that's not possible," she said, though there was less certainty in it than she intended. "That signature's been sealed with the case file. There's no way a training aid from that job is still—" "I didn't put it there," Grady said. "It's been there. Somebody built it into his line before I ever got him, and it's never once fired. Because nobody who carried that scent has ever stood in one of our yards. Until now." He looked at Newell again, and this time it was not suspicion in his face, and not pity either. It was the specific, disoriented respect of a young man realizing the ground under a 15-year-old story had just shifted without anyone's permission. "Sir," Grady said, "I need to see that manifest. The sealed one, today." He was already reaching for his radio, and Cedar had still not moved, had not broken the alert by so much as a degree, sitting rigid and locked at the boots of a man the depot had spent that entire morning trying to walk quietly back out its own front gate. And the true story, the one that had been waiting 15 years under a bronze plaque still cooling in a foundry 2 counties away, had only just now, at the yard's shabby forgotten corner, begun. What happened in the next hour was not the clean unraveling anyone might have hoped for. It was, instead, exactly the kind of tangle institutions produce when a fact refuses to fit the paperwork built around its absence. The first response from base security was containment. A dog breaking a live drill to alert on a civilian read, on paper, like exactly one thing: possible contamination. Old ordnance residue, a hazard signature, not a memory. Within 4 minutes, a perimeter had gone up around the yard's corner. 2 more handlers were being paged, and a young lieutenant with a radio clipped high on his vest was already reciting protocol about controlled evacuation, while Grady stood between the tape and his own dog, insisting, with rising frustration, that Cedar's alert wasn't defensive, wasn't warning them off anything, that the posture was calm, was final, was recognition, not danger. It took Tessa Ogle, breaking from the records building at a flat run with a folder under one arm, to cut through it. "It's not a hazard signature," she said, breathless, holding up a laminated training reference card she'd pulled from her own desk. "Look at the ear position. Look at the tail. That's not an ordnance alert posture. That's a person match posture. That's the same alert profile they use for cadaver and human scent work. It's just calibrated tighter because—" She stopped, looked at Newell, and something in her voice softened without her quite meaning it to. "Because he's not a hazard. The dog's not warning anyone. He's remembering somebody." The perimeter came down, slower than it had gone up, security radios crackling with a kind of institutional embarrassment that never quite gets spoken aloud. That left the manifest, and the manifest, it turned out, was a problem of its own. "It's not digitized," said the records clerk Grady reached by phone, a tired man named Soul, 3 buildings over. "That whole box of original contractor paperwork from that job. Duplicate copies, they're marked. Retention schedule flagged it for destruction. I've got a shred order already cut. 48 hours, maybe less if the truck comes early. 48 hours, 3 days to Saturday ceremony, and less than 2 of those days left before the only surviving proof of a contractor number sat in a bin waiting for a truck that didn't care what it carried." Kendra, standing at the edge of all of it, with her lanyard finally still against her chest, turned to Newell with something harder in her face than she'd shown that morning. Not cruelty, just the flat exhaustion of a woman watching her carefully built week come apart at the seams over a man she still didn't understand. "For the record," she said, "I need you to explain to me, plainly, right now, who you are and why a Navy working dog just alerted on you like you're a piece of physical evidence." Newell was quiet a moment. When he spoke, it was not defensive, not pleading, just short, true sentences, offered the way a man offers change he's already counted. "I was a contractor on that job," he said. "Sonar array recovery, 15 years back." "Your name isn't anywhere on that file," Kendra said. "I've read that file cover to cover 4 times this month alone." "I know it isn't," Newell said. "Then how do you explain that?" "I don't," he said. "Not yet." It was the wrong answer for the moment and the right answer for the man. Kendra heard evasion in it, heard a shabby stranger protecting a story that wouldn't hold up to daylight, heard exactly the pattern she'd learned to recognize in 2 prior hoaxers that same year. She did not hear, because she had no way yet to hear it, 36 years of a trade that taught a man to answer only what was true and to leave the rest underwater until it was safe to surface. "Then I'm going to need you to wait outside the yard," she said, not unkindly, but final, "until somebody can tell me something I can actually put in a report." Newell nodded and went and did not argue, because arguing had never once in his life gotten a stuck valve to turn or a dive line to run true, and he saw no reason to believe it would work any better here. Grady Beale did not sleep that night. He drove to the records annex himself at 1900 hours, badge in hand, and told Soule he wanted the sealed personnel file pulled. Not the training aid archive, the human one, the after-action report itself, the one that had sat unopened behind 2 authorization signatures since the case first closed. It took him 4 hours, working alone under a gooseneck lamp with the shred bin visible through the annex window, to piece together what the report had been built to hide. The recovery mission, 15 years back, a classified sonar array recovery, deeper and more dangerous than the initial op order allowed, run over budget by a figure large enough to draw a congressional inquiry if it ever surfaced cleanly. The commanding officer of that operation, a rear admiral named Osgood Ravenwood, dead 9 years now, had signed off on an after-action report that closed the books with unusual tidiness. One presumed lost contractor, unrecovered, case permanently open. One surviving sailor credited, in the same report, with single-handed heroism under fire that had, according to the plaque commissioned from that report, cost him nothing but a Purple Heart and a permanent limp. Grady read the surviving sailor's name 3 times before it settled. Alton Hobbs, still living. A retired petty officer, 78 years old now, residing 40 miles north, listed in the depot's own Veterans Outreach database as a man who had, every single year since his discharge, politely declined every invitation to speak at a ceremony honoring his own supposed heroism. Grady understood, reading it, exactly what that meant. The way a man understands a current has turned before he can see it move. Newell Prentice had not vanished from that report by accident. He had been paid, quietly, to accept a contractor's silence in exchange for his own protection, injured and unrecorded, while Ravenwood needed the books closed clean before his own retirement review. And rather than credit the truth, someone had simply moved the story onto a man still alive to wear it, a dive tender named Hobbs, who had, by every account Grady could find, spent 15 years ashamed of a medal he privately believed he had never earned. 2 men, one buried under a wrong that called him dead, one buried under a wrong that called him a hero. Neither of them, in 15 years, had said a single word to correct it. Grady sat back from the lamp a long moment, the shred bin's dull shape still visible through the window glass, and understood that what he was holding was no longer a training aid anomaly, and no longer a hoax to be walked off Navy property. It was a debt with 2 names on it, and a Saturday deadline, and a man 40 miles away who did not yet know that tomorrow, for the first time in 15 years, someone was finally coming to tell him the truth. Kendra Wycliffe read the manifest herself just after midnight, alone in her office with the ceremony program open on the other half of her screen, and she did not stop reading until she reached the contractor pages twice. She did not sleep either. She sat with it a long while, the cursor blinking on a document she had built with genuine care over 11 weeks. A program meant to close a 15-year wound cleanly, meant to honor a name that, she now understood with a slow, cold settling in her chest, had never earned the shape it was cast in. She thought of every time that week she had said, for the record, to a man who had only ever answered her with the truth in pieces too small to argue with. She thought of the word hoaxer, and how easily it had come to her mouth that morning, and how little it had cost her to say it, and how much it might have cost him to hear it. At 1:30, she began retyping the program by hand, not because the printer was broken, but because some corrections, she found, needed to pass through a person's fingers to feel real. Alton Hobbs arrived at the depot the next afternoon in a car driven by his granddaughter. Walking with the same permanent limp, the after-action report had once credited to a different story than the true one. And he stood at the yard's edge, exactly where Newell had stood 2 days before, uncertain whether he was welcome. Newell crossed the yard to him without hurry, the way he had crossed 100 decks in his life, and the 2 old men stood a moment simply looking at each other. 15 years and a false plaque between them. "You held the line that day," Newell said finally. "Every foot of it. I never forgot that." "I never earned what they gave me for it," Hobbs said, voice thinner than it once was but steady. I've known that every year they've asked me to stand up and take a bow for a man they said didn't come home. I couldn't say why it felt wrong. Now I know." "You didn't do anything wrong," Newell said. "You did your job. Somebody else did the lying." Kendra, standing a respectful distance off with the retyped program in both hands, stepped forward then, and it was Grady who spoke first, quiet, to the small gathered knot of sailors who had drifted over without quite meaning to. "The name on Saturday's plaque isn't wrong because Petty Officer Hobbs did anything wrong," he said. "It's wrong because somebody needed a clean story 15 years ago, and clean stories are never the true ones." "For the record," Kendra said, and her voice caught, just slightly on the next word, "the corrected program reads both names, together, neither one above the other." Newell shook his head once, mild as ever. "Don't need my name on anything," he said. "Never came here for that." He looked at Hobbs, then back at Kendra, and something in his face, not pride, something quieter, settled into place. "I didn't come back for my name, Chief. I came back because Opal always said a debt doesn't stop being owed just because nobody's asking for it." Nobody in that yard asked who Opal was. Somehow, in the way he said it, they understood they weren't meant to ask, only to understand that whatever peace this cost him to admit, he had carried it a long way to get here, and he wanted nothing from the carrying except that it finally be set down correctly. "His name stays beside mine," Newell said. "Not above it, beside it. That's the whole of what I want." Saturday came in clear and cool, the kind of October light that makes a bronze plaque look less like metal and more like something warmed from within. The chairs Kendra had fought for over 11 exhausting weeks filled with more people than the program had counted on. Sailors, families, 2 admirals, and in the second row, side by side, an old farmer in a coat gone the color of wet sand and a retired dive tender with a permanent limp, sitting the way men sit who have finally been given somewhere to put 15 years down. Kendra read both names herself, her own choice, her own correction, and her voice did catch on the word diver, just as it had at midnight 3 nights before. And nobody in that yard thought less of her for it, least of all Newell, who watched her steady herself and thought, without saying so, that grace extended costs a person something, and that the costing was worth watching. Cedar sat at perfect attention beside Grady through the whole reading, ears forward, calm now, the alert long since folded back into ordinary stillness, a debt of his own quietly discharged. Weeks later, the farm had gone back to being only a farm. Newell stood at the kitchen counter one morning with the kettle ticking toward a boil, Opal's glasses still resting on the windowsill exactly as they had for 9 years, and around his neck, for the first time in 15, the bootlace hung where a chain would hang, the brass tag warmed against his collarbone instead of folded in a pocket. He hummed the same 4 bars he always hummed, no louder than before, no different in any way a stranger could have named. Only he could have said what had changed, and he did not need to say it aloud to know it was true. "Paid," he said to the empty kitchen, quiet, the way another man might say, "Amen." Finally paid. Some debts don't expire when the paperwork does. They wait for the right October. Newell Prentice and Alton Hobbs sat that same week on the depot's dock in the last low light of the season, the tide coming in slow and even against the pilings, Cedar's silvered head resting easy across both their boots, and neither man said much of anything at all, because by then, at last, there was nothing left that needed saying.